The year is 253. The Roman Empire is being attacked from all sides. Countless Germanic tribes threaten the empire, invading, penetrating sometimes deep into Roman territory, sacking cities along their way. To make matters worse, the plague just broke out, a very aggressive disease that suddenly befalls people, killing millions in the Roman Empire. And as if that wasn't enough, there was again, as so often, war with the mighty eternal enemy in the east, the Persian Empire. In 252, the Persians under Shapur I had defeated a Roman army at the Battle of Barbalissos, and as a consequence, the way into the province of Syria was now open. The Sassanid Persians proceeded to invade the province and even laid siege to the impressive and beautiful city of Antioch in 253 or 254. The city was eventually captured and 100,000 Romans in that city were killed. Under this incredibly dire backdrop, a man named Valerian was proclaimed emperor in 253. And this emperor had a very strange fate, a fate most unusual in the entire history of the Roman Empire. In this video, we are going to try to find out what happened to Emperor Valerian. Many emperors in the 1500-year lasting history of the Roman Empire had unusual fates. Many of them died in battle, some were murdered, some others died of natural causes. But seldomly has the fate of a Roman emperor sparked more different accounts than what supposedly happened to the Emperor Valerian. What makes this emperor so unique and tragic is that he was one of the very few emperors to have ever been captured by an opposing army, namely by the Sassanid Persians under Shapur I in 260 AD. Another such event happened after the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 AD, when the Emperor Romanos IV was captured by the Seljuk Turks. But according to some accounts, Valerian was not treated as friendly by his captors as Romanos was. Because supposedly, not only was he captured, but humiliated, or even worse, executed in a most gruesome manner. One account is more brutal and insane than the other. It is said, for instance, that for the rest of his life after being captured, Valerian had to serve as a footstool for Shapur I, so that Shapur would step on his back every time before mounting a horse. In another account after his death, he was skinned, and his skin made into a trophy and displayed in the main Persian throne room. In another account, this happened while he was still alive. In another account, he had to swallow molten gold. Basically the most gruesome stuff that you could ever imagine. But is that all true? All these differing accounts can after all not be true at the same time. So what happened really? Emperor Valerian is one of those tragic historical figures that got a lot of bad reputation for what happened to them, completely negating everything that came before. The same applies, for instance, to Emperor Valens, whose one fatal mistake at Adrianople would come to define how the world would view and remember him, completely negating everything that he did before and only remembering as the bad emperor who lost at Adrianople. This, of course, for instance, also applies to Romanos IV, who is unfairly often only remembered as the guy who lost at the Battle of Manzikert. Now, it might be surprising to you that Valerian was actually in fact a quite capable emperor. When he became emperor in 253, proclaimed by the soldiers, as so often happened back then, but actually confirmed by the Senate, he immediately made his son Gallienus co-emperor. Now that deed alone deserves praise because, as it turned out, Gallienus would be an extremely capable emperor who managed to reign for a staggering 15 years in that crazy time in the middle of the crisis of the 3rd century, a time when the Roman Empire almost fell, and Gallienus would initiate some incredibly important reforms that would ensure the survival of the Roman Empire. If you are a fan of Roman history and you would want to buy an item for yourself or someone else as a present, then you might want to consider the SPQR Shop. They produce incredible replicas of Roman history with a very high attention to detail. All their items are carefully handcrafted, and I think it will be difficult to find that level of craftsmanship anywhere else. They handcraft Roman coin replicas, rings, pendants, attributes, and many other items of Roman history. If you want to support the channel, or if you want to buy a present for someone who likes Roman history, please go and check out their excellent site, link in the description. If you buy over this link, you will receive a 20% price reduction, which I personally find very generous. Thank you very much for your consideration, and back to the video. Valerian recognized that he could not save the Roman Empire on his own, and thus he tasked Gallienus to govern the western half of the empire and solve the problem of the constant barbarian incursions, where Germanic tribes more and more often managed to penetrate the Rhine and Danube frontiers, while he himself would solve the problems of the east. And indeed, this plan worked quite well for several years. From 255 to 257, Valerian managed to drive back the Persians from Syria, restoring that province again to Roman control. It is often forgotten how successful Valerian actually initially was. But even as he was still fighting the Persians, the Goths broke through the Danube and managed to penetrate into Thrace, even reaching as far as Asia Minor. Upon hearing these bad news, Valerian retreated westward in order to face the Goths. He managed to halt their advance, but he couldn't go further because not long later the Persians again began to advance. Thus, Valerian had to return and proceeded to Antioch, where he defended the city against further attacks from the Persians. In the west, meanwhile, his son Gallienus had managed to drive back multiple Germanic incursions into Gallia, fortifying many cities and even securing an alliance with the Germanic tribe of the Marcomanni. So things weren't looking extremely bad anymore in 257. But unfortunately, as I said before, the Roman Empire didn't only have to battle enemies from without, but also a much more deadly enemy from within. All the while these things happened, the Cyprian plague broke out and was killing millions across the Roman Empire. And so it happened, and this is also often forgotten or unfairly left out, that Valerian's army at some point, as they were in the east, was infected with the plague. So when Valerian arrived at the city of Edessa in order to protect it against the Persians in 259 or 260, a quite high percentage of the Roman army had already been killed by the plague. The rest of the army that was still alive was probably not in the best state, weakened or still very sick. Here there are again multiple accounts of what happened afterwards. In one account, there was actually no battle, but the emperor, seeing that many of his men had died by the plague, thought that his chances to win against the Persians in this state were very slim. So he decided to negotiate with Shapur. He thus went forth with a delegation in order to negotiate, but Shapur used that situation to his advantage and captured the emperor together with his entire entourage, meaning with other high-ranking Roman officials and generals. In another account, there was actually a battle, and the weakened Romans, of course, didn't stand a chance in that state that they were in and lost. In this version, Valerian was then captured together with his entire entourage and a sizable portion of the surviving Roman army. This second version is the one that Shapur himself propagated and had inscribed in several places. But of course, which version is true is not easy to find out, because as we can imagine, propaganda being propaganda, it would make far more sense for Shapur to claim to have the Romans utterly defeated than to admit that they actually had already been defeated beforehand by the plague. But of course, this is very hard to tell. A battle might indeed have taken place. Many Romans had died either way. If killed by Persians or by the plague, probably mattered very little to them. And so no matter what happened, Valerian was captured in 260 AD. This event is pretty much undisputed. It very likely did happen because after that event, immediately a lot of usurpers sprung up in the entire Roman Empire, which Gallienus had to fight. And this very likely would not have happened if Valerian would not have been captured. Now, there are differing accounts of what happened after Valerian was captured. One account is by the Roman historian Eutropius, who lived in the second part of the 4th century. He wrote that Valerian, quote, was overthrown by Shapur, king of Persia, and being soon after made prisoner, grew old in ignominious slavery among the Parthians, end quote. Nothing about being made a footstool, nothing about being executed in a gruesome manner, or other gruesome things happening to him. Another source, which was a lot more biased, was by the Christian writer Lactantius, who also served as an early advisor to the Emperor Constantine. Now, Lactantius not only hated the Persians with great zeal, but also Valerian, because under Valerian, there were anti-Christian persecutions that had taken place, and so Lactantius, having been a Christian himself, did of course want to paint Valerian in the worst possible light. In 257, Valerian issued an edict together with Gallienus demanding that, quote, those who do not venerate the Roman religion should acknowledge the Roman ceremonies, end quote. Of course, most of them refused to do so, and so in 258, Valerian and Gallienus issued another edict demanding the death penalty for refusing to adhere to the ancient Roman religion. Saint Cyprian of Carthage was thus executed in 258, and some other Christian clergymen as well. And hence it should not surprise us that Lactantius, writing about Valerian, who had inflicted great pain on the Christian community, was absolutely not neutral, and so he probably invented the story about the many humiliations that Valerian had to endure before then being brutally executed, or that his skin was later turned into a trophy, and similar accounts, which are all variations of the same trope. Eusebius, another Christian writer, had similar things to say about Valerian, unsurprisingly. But the much more neutral account from Eutropius shouldn't surprise us, because Eutropius was not a Christian and might possibly have been a pagan. So we again see how powerful propaganda can be, and that we should never blindly believe anything that we hear about Roman emperors. We always first have to check the source. Who wrote this? And why did he write that? And only then can we interpret what we read about these emperors. Modern scholars actually think that it is far more likely that yes, Valerian was captured together with some soldiers and high-ranking officials, but that he was actually treated pretty well. According to one scholar named Touraj Darye, who specializes in Iranian history, Shapur I sent Valerian and some of his army to the city of Bishapur or Gundishapur, where they lived in relatively good conditions. Shapur used the remaining soldiers in engineering and development plans. Band-e-Kaisar, which is Caesar's dam, is one of the remnants of Roman engineering located near the ancient city of Susa, which stems exactly from the time of Valerian's captivity, so from the 260s. According to an interesting account by the early Muslim scholar Abu Hanifa Dinavari, Shapur settled the prisoners of war in Gundishapur, but even released Valerian after the construction of Band e Caesar, Caesar's dam. Which is super interesting, because if that was the case and Valerian was really released after being a prisoner of war, then what happened to Valerian after his release? Did he die on his way? Did he maybe even manage to reach the Roman Empire? Valerian is not mentioned again later of being seen in the Roman Empire. But who knows, after all, he might have been an old man by this time. In 260 AD, after all, Valerian was already 61 years old. So now he might have been in his late 60s or maybe even early 70s. Maybe he chose to stay in Persia, not wanting to face the unfriendly welcome in the Roman Empire. Or maybe he did try to make it back, but died on the way. Valerian's story is utterly fascinating, because it shows that we should never believe the crazy stories that we read about Roman emperors before checking the sources. And also it shows that bias and propaganda are always at work. Whatever happened to Valerian, if he lived out the rest of his life in comfortable captivity, or if he really somehow made it back to the Roman Empire, maybe with a new identity, or whatever might be the case, we can exclude with a high degree of certainty that he was used as a footstool or that he was turned into a trophy. Those things make for some pretty good gruesome stories, but for not much more. If you like this video, please consider supporting this channel via Patreon or via YouTube membership, because it is your support that makes this channel possible. You would have my utmost gratitude. Thank you so much. And of course, I would like to thank everybody who supports Maiorianus. You people are amazing. And if you want to learn more about the crisis of the 3rd century, you can watch this video in the upper right corner. But if you want to learn more about the Cyprian plague, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.